Welcome to my tutorial on how to write better story beginnings. A lot of the things that you're going to learn today, I hope that you can incorporate into all of your writing. I just happen to see this a lot when I open up a story and read the first page. I'm going to read this little example really quick and then we're going to talk about it for a minute. There was no place Mary would rather be than in her grandmother's house. She loved the comfortable furniture and cheerful gingham curtains. The scent of mulberry and freshly baked bread still lingered in the air. But how was that even possible when her grandma had died a month ago? She walked around the living room looking at her grandma's possessions. This place belonged to her now. It had been left to her in the will, despite the fact that it should have gone to her aunt. Yes, there was going to be a lot of drama about that. Well, she'd dealt with drama before, and she could do so again. She wasn't the same shy little girl she'd once been. No, with her job as an executive for one of the biggest advertising companies in New York, she'd learned how to stand up to people. She even looked different. In fact, in her crisp pencil skirt and designer silk blouse, she looked nothing like the younger version of herself who had run free around the countryside here in frayed cut-off shorts and a t-shirt that was worn thin enough to let the breeze through. Moving into the kitchen, she saw the note that her grandma had left for the lady who came to clean for her every week. Apparently, she'd wanted Susie to clean the ceiling fans. With the layer of dust on everything in the house, Mary hoped she could get Susie to come in and dust everything, especially if she was going to be here for a while, which she might be. After all, her doctor had warned her that if she didn't take a break and get her stress under control, she'd end up having another breakdown, one that would take longer than a few days in the hospital to recover from. And the little cottage on Blackberry Lane was just the place to do that, especially since it was 1,600 miles away from Lane. After all, he was the real reason for her breakdown, not her hectic schedule. So the main thing about this that just hits you over the head, or if it doesn't, maybe it should, is that there's nothing going on. It's just a woman in an empty house moving around, looking at things. And more than that, we're completely in her head. There's no dialogue. Every bit of information is being filtered through her, and it just comes off looking like info dump kind of information, instead of it being, dynamic and interesting details that the reader can kind of grab onto and make their own assumptions from. One of the problems is that Mary is the only character on scene, and I feel very strongly that you should try your best to have another character in your opening scene with your main character, because it will allow them to interact with somebody. It will help you to put dialogue in there so that you don't get stuck inside their head. And it will also give you someone to be a foil to them, to contrast with them. And that way you can see their personality. You can see how they interact with people. You can kind of catch a lot of cues about them from how they interact and how they talk to this person. So the first thing I would suggest is, for us to put somebody else into this scene. Another thing is this is a bad example of telling a story instead of showing it. A lot of people have a really hard time understanding what show don't tell means. And the way I like to think about it is this is writing where you are telling yourself the story. Like you would sit down and talk to somebody across the table and say, yeah, I went to the mall yesterday and I went to that store that I really like and they were having a sale. So I was able to find some jeans that I really wanted for 50% off. And after that, I went to the food court and I bought myself a slice of pizza. And it was really good, but I kind of think it's going to give me heartburn later on. And I always get heartburn. So as you can see, you're telling somebody a story. And that is kind of where the art of storytelling came from. It's something that we all do all the time. But when you're sitting down to write a story, you have to do it differently. You have to be able to present details where the reader can fill in all of the landscape of your story and let a movie play in their head. You're not trying to talk the story to them. You're trying to show the story to them. And so that's why the show don't tell thing, is so important, is that you're trying to allow them to sink into a scene instead of sit there and listen, if that makes sense. There are a lot of individual sort of micro level things that you can do with show don't tell, but this is on a broader version of that. So we are going to go on and see what we can do to mix this up a little bit and write the same story in a better way. Okay guys, I'm going to try something very brave here and write while this is being recorded. I have no idea how this is going to turn out. We will see. But I want to show you kind of line by line as I go along why I'm making the choices that I am making. So I'm putting chapter 1 just so we all remember that that is what we are working on. This is the first chapter of a book. Okay, so I want to start with a sentence that is going to kind of ask a question or make the reader ask a question. And I'm not going to worry about it too much though, whether or not it's just like the best first sentence ever, because a lot of times the hardest part with starting a story is thinking that that first sentence has to be perfect, and then we never really get going. So, let's see here. Okay, so what I've tried to do with this first chapter is to instill that question, why would a house be intimidating? I've dropped the information that she owns the house, but that she hasn't always. And instead of saying grandma, I'm using grandmother because it formalizes her. And so it helps me to create more of this atmosphere of the house having, something that almost is a personality in and of its own that came from the figure that used to live in it and own it. And then I'm contrasting it with the girl that she was. So we have this whole first little intro, and we have now been in her head for way too long, and it's time to bring somebody else in. maybe that's gross. You know, sweat is always one of the things that can be sexy or gross, and I think I'm not going to go there with that one. Okay, so now we have firmly established a few things. We brought in a little bit of dialogue, which is going to turn into more. And we have a dynamic shifting here between her being alone and her being around somebody else. Hopefully somebody that is going to have this sort of pull and tug between she doesn't want to be interested, but she can't help but be. We're also going to go ahead, sorry, I can't ignore my typos here. Who's obviously going to register to the reader as a potential love interest because he is described in a pleasing way here. And so we've pretty much established that this is going to be a romance. And just a little bit more about, you know, the fact that she's been here before. So let's see what else we can do. One of the things that I mentioned in the first chapter that we read was that she was an executive from a big city who had a lot of stress on her hands. So I want to show a way for us to show that to the reader without coming right out and saying it. How do you spell that word? I'm the worst typist in the world, by the way. Let's see, has she gone all the way up the stairs yet? Nope. can't turn the key if she hasn't put it in the lock. Don't want to use her name too often. I don't like that. Let's think of a funny nickname for him. So at this point, we have an interaction going on between these two. We can see by her reaction to the door not opening that she's a little bit stressed out and impatient. And we can see that he's kind of calm, ready to take over and save the day kind of guy. That he is strong, and also that he knows who she is. So, at this point, I feel like I could go on and on and on, and we're just now moving into the same kind of scene where the other one started. But now we're going to have Mr. Muscles going into the room with her as she's looking around, and we'll be able to find out a lot of information as they talk, and she's going to be annoyed with him. So we've got, a few different tropes already going on in the story. We've got the fish out of water. We've got the kind of the big city, country town thing going on. We have enemies to lovers kind of starting up here, and a lot of different things like that. So we are starting to pick up that it's definitely a romance. But if you go back through, and I'm not saying that this is the best writing ever because it's a rough draft, but you'll be able to see, for one thing, that the paragraphs are broken up a little bit more. And we're able to catch on to a lot of information that we just weren't getting in such a natural way before. So I hope that you find something that was interesting for you here, but mostly I want you to go back and look at the first chapter of whatever you're working on and figure out if you are telling someone a story or if you are showing it to them. So if you're telling, then figure out how to reshape it into something that is more active and has more dialogue and more hooking situations going on.